Theology is actually a very broad course. No, there is a famous saying by Henry Newman: "You cannot take theology in a teacup." It's Hi there. So probably you'd ask yourself, why am I here? Why am I watching this YouTube video? Well, or that's the question that I hope I could give an answer. Why do we need to study theology? I have some few answers that should be the reason as to why we need to study theology. First is, if you try to look at the news or around you, all too often, they are products of, well, sometimes faith statements like "I don't believe in God" or "I believe in God," or people like this should be punished because according to the Bible. All of this are reflections coming from our faith. If you don't believe in God, probably you have theologized, you have thought of God, the reality of God. If you believe in God, probably you have thought of God and then come to a conclusion that there is a God. If you have a theological statement, then probably you have reflected at some point theologically. So why do we need to study theology when in fact we could theologize even not in a formal setting? That's the problem. Not many people, or many people actually, would come up with theological reflections. But the problem with some theological reflections is that oftentimes they could be used to oppress or marginalize people instead of the other way around, wherein the fruits of a reflection should bring people, should give light to people, to dispel the sufferings of other people. But oftentimes, it veers into the opposite direction. And that's why when people when people are doing theology, or what we hope to do here is that we could correct our theology and we could avoid dangerous thoughts and ideas in theologies. Second is, if you try to look at the world around us, the news that we would hear from people, from any media outlet, your social media, you open your social media and you have all this terrible news lining up. The year 2020 opened with so many bad news, and we think 2020 has already started. The worst of 2020 was on January, but then later did we realize that the whole of 2020 will be a terrible year, right? But it's not something that's new. Actually, even before, we have experienced pandemics, we have experienced wars. I'm not comparing which one is far worse than the other, but rather, these events that we have experienced, oftentimes they have victims. There are victims, there are people who suffered from these events. Many years ago, there was this war in Syria, and many people lost their homes, left their hometown, even though it's hard for them just to survive. And that continues not only in Syria. You go to Latin America, you would hear news about people being hunted down by gangs. So they traveled way north to find countries, democracies, so that they could live in peace. And we could hear news from also other countries, that there is a big deforestation, like for example in Brazil, because there are our desire for meat led to the deforestation of the Amazon. It sounds so bleak, the news. And the problem there is we could simply say, well, I could distance myself, but then these people, they could not. They are living in that reality, which for us are simply news. And what's the connection of theology there? See, their problems, you don't serve their problems if we simply offer pious platitudes or sloganish answers. Instead of being light-giving to them, comforting them, I think we are hurting all the more their condition. See, because of the intricacies of the problems, the issues that we are experiencing, we needed all the more deep critical reflection. And hopefully theology brings you into that. That's why we need to study theology. What do we do in theology that bring us to a deep critical reflection? In my classes, I expect my learners to tackle issues or to tackle problems that will enlighten them into thinking or put them in a certain vantage point that they have never been in, so that they continue to reflect and continue to ask themselves, to look into them, to look inside of them and ask themselves, well, what's next? What am I supposed to say? What should be the right thing to do? I hope I bring you into that kind of thinking, because oftentimes what the world lacks and what many people lacks is the ability to reflect in situations. And we hope to really sort of nourish leaders later on, leaders that could reflect, leaders that could ask themselves questions that are hardly questioned by our own leaders. That's my hope as to why, or that's my reason as to why I teach theology, is that there's a hope in me that someday I will create students who think critically, reflect very well. But what do we do in theology? And what is theology, by the way? We started with the why, and I wanted to end with what is theology. With that, what's our method? I have told you that we continually tackle issues, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to grapple with some principles. We're going to look and reflect into the church teachings. We are gonna faithfully hold on to the Word of God, which flows into two streams, tradition and scriptures. But what is theology? If you look at it etymologically, it simply means the study of God. No? Theos meaning God, and logos, Greek word that means discourse or pag-uusap or salita, or in short, it's simply a study. So we're going to reflect on the reality of our faith, and the outcome of this reflection is also part of what we call theology. So that is what we call theology. So I hope you have learned something today. But now,